The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another 50 Acres Academy webinar. There's been a couple of months break where I went away over the Christmas break, and then we sort of were a bit slow off the blocks getting back into it this year. We've been quite busy with client projects, so my apologies for anyone who was sort of patiently waiting for us to start up again, but we're now back into it, and we'll be doing these monthly, probably in the first week of each month. So if there's any topics that anyone finds interesting, of interest, that they're interested in us talking about, please let me know via email. Always welcome to get questions and answer requests and talk to subjects that people are interested in. So just to get started, for those of you who are not familiar with the GoToWebinar process, if you want to put any questions to me, as I'm very happy to answer them as we go along. So you just pop them into the question panel on the panel on your right. Hopefully you can see that in the control panel, and then I'll respond to them as I go. So today we're talking about member communications, which, I think in some respects this really applies to a lot of organisations and companies, really. It's about tailoring communications to make sure that the people that are getting them are really interested in what you're saying, rather than being overwhelmed by the amazing enormity of the information that they are now being confronted with. So I think these points that I'm going to be making today is pretty applicable to pretty much every area of life, and whether or not you're working in a corporate or a not-for-profit or a government agency, or where you might be working. Whether that's an organisation, member organisation or not. So just to kick off, I suppose the first point that I wanted to make was really, we're all vying for an extraordinary amount of attention. I can remember, I'm old enough to remember life before an iPhone, and days when I used to get the newspaper delivered to my front lawn. My husband worked in Fairfax for 27 years before he left at Christmas time to start working for the Leader of the Opposition as a media advisor. But during that 27 years, even we stopped getting the newspapers delivered because it was sort of easier to get a digital subscription where you could have it on the go. So I think, we are seeing a huge transformation in the way we get information. We used to get information delivered in very digestible amounts, where the newspaper would lob up in the morning. You would perhaps read it before you went to work or on the train or bus, and then you would perhaps listen to the radio if you're driving, and then through the day, depending on what you did, you may not necessarily get a lot of news until the end of the day. And that really wasn't that long ago. The world has really changed now. If you think yourself about the areas that you get information from each day, I think we would all be surprised if we analysed the amount of information sources that we're relying on, and they're quite extraordinary. They range from blogs to Google searches to Wikipedia to online platforms to radio to podcasts, all of the information that we are using to rely on to make decisions about all sorts of things, from who we might donate money to who we might support in an election, to what we might buy. There's a whole range of decisions we're making on the basis of information that is immediately accessible to us. But one of the things I think that is happening because of that is we are getting overwhelmed with information, and that's no more true than the amount of information that perhaps your members or your stakeholders are receiving that you're sending them. And how do we make that relevant? That's what we're going to talk about today. But just having a think about some of the access issues. WhatsApp now has nearly 5 million active Australian users. 50% of Australians log into Facebook on a daily basis, and there are 15 million unique visitors to YouTube in Australia as well, which is, pretty extraordinary. I often hear the fact that, women, I don't know why this is the case, but women are supposed to be on Facebook and social media for sort of 2 to 3 hours a day. I'm sure men are probably the same, but we are the victims of being able to access that information, and there is no escaping it. So when the question then comes, how do we then move to communicating with the people that we need to talk to in a way which they will listen effectively, so that they don't ignore us, and they don't turn away, and they are excited by what we're doing. And that's what I want to talk about today. So, in terms of associations, and again, as I said before, I think this is really applicable for any organisation or even company, whoever you are, what is happening is people are fatigued. Keeping people engaged, specifically if it's a member organisation or a not-for-profit, your stakeholders and your members are fatigued. They need really new reasons and a relevancy to keep them engaged, and also to attract new people that are interested in what you're doing, your members or new stakeholders or new supporters or new donors. Increasing engagement was seen as the most important goal for organisations and not-for-profits in 2016 moving forward. That's into obviously last year and moving forward. That's obviously not gone away. Sorry, just trying to move my page. So how are the ways that we communicate to people? And, we could be doing all sorts of things as, internal communications within your organisation or company or not-for-profit. There's also external communications, which is really the focus of what we're thinking about today. And, a lot of people, I'll be interested to know if anyone has got any sort of thoughts that they might pop in the question box, or the comment box. But, on average, how many times a week or a month are you emailing EDMs out to stakeholders or your members? And I think often we've done some audits of people recently, a couple of audits for some large member organisations, and it was interesting to see just how often they were emailing people and what they were tending to do. And I think this is where the issue was they were doing quite generic, not untargeted, if you'd like, EDMs, which are perhaps full of really relevant and fantastic information, but there was almost too much of it. And as a consequence, people didn't know where to go. They didn't know what was relevant for them within their professional sector. And as a consequence, they really switched off to some extent because they were getting too many untargeted and general emails and EDMs, which was the issue. And we will, drill down onto how we can sort of remedy this in a second. But someone's just made a point, sometimes too often, sometimes 10 EDMs a week. This is Chris, who's in a large membership organisation. And that's really interesting. You might have, I was talking to a large mental health not-for-profit last week. They have 350,000 people engaged in their mailing list. And you can imagine if every single person got every single thing, then people do tend to switch off. So if you're asking them to do something, whatever that thing is, writing to someone, donating, talking to their local member of parliament, going to their school, whatever it is, whatever you're asking someone to do, if you're asking everyone the same thing, not everyone's going to want to do everything that you're asking them for. And so I think the more targeted that you can be, and thinking about that is really critical. That means, of course, that you need to have a really clever and astute and well-informed database, which is manipulatable, information heavy, and moreover, something that you use. We couple of years ago now, did a really big piece of work for another membership organisation, which probably most of you would know. I won't talk about who it is, but they had commissioned someone to create a database for them in a CRM system for something like $1.5 million, which is just sort of phenomenal in terms of the money they could have perhaps used for something else. And, in some respects, it depends on the size of your organisation and what you need to do with it, but there are a lot of off-the-shelf CRM and, integratable database CRM systems that can be used that don't require bespoke engineering and coding in the back end. And so I would urge you, if you are still, using something that you're not happy with, or, that's old school or isn't giving you the dividends that you require, that you do some really solid work on thinking about how that might be able to be changed in order to utilize something that is manipulatable, because there is a lot of CRM databases out there that can be used. We use something called HighRise, which is part of Basecamp. We used to use Basecamp along with HighRise. We've now dropped Basecamp. We're using a system called 10K or 10,000 feet to manage our projects. But HighRise we've been on for a long time, and we've now got a database of many thousands, and it's stood the test of time over 8 years, and it grows with us, and we can link that into a range of other plugins and platforms. So I really do think, I suppose, in terms of thinking about how you set this up and what you need to do to think about it, is you need to get the structure right in terms of accessing people and how you drill down and get that information and how you interrogate that database. Some interesting facts here on the screen. 90% of US associations are concerned about sending too many mass emails. Chris's point's interesting. I wonder whether or not there's anyone else out there whose organisation sends sometimes 10 EDMs a week. That's quite amazing. And I suspect there probably are many organisations that do that. I subscribe to lots of newsletters, and occasionally you just get too much. And so what happens is, I've got a couple of platforms where I can go in and look at the platforms that I've subscribed to and just do a mass unsubscribe, or not everyone, but I will go in and carefully select that. And I think it gets to a point where you do unsubscribe. And so if you're wanting to keep people, to communicate with them effectively, you don't want to be one of those ones that's going to be unsubscribed too regularly. You want to get people to stay the distance with you, which I think is a critical thing. Someone's asked a question: how do you work out how many EDMs your audience will tolerate? Well, that's a really good question, Selena. I think probably what I would probably do, if you know your membership or your organisation or your stakeholders well, is you probably would do a survey. Again, there is lots of different free survey platforms you can use. You can use SurveyMonkey. Google has its own survey platform now that you can use, which is very good. There's lots and lots of survey platforms that you can tap into. I would survey them and ask them carefully and gently what it is they'd like to hear from you. Give them some examples, and see what they say is probably the best thing to do. If you can't talk to them by phone, the next best thing is to ask them via email. And even if you get sort of 5% of your members, or even a couple of hundred, that's a really good litmus test about what it is that people are wanting. So the open and click rates are dropping, and this again is some US data, but I think we would probably see this writ large here in Australia, from 36% in 2016 to 35%. Sorry, I think that's 2016 to 2017. It would be interesting to see whether or not any of you are seeing that trend here. I would suspect we probably are. It used to be that around 30% was a good click open rate, and it's important, I think, again, to be able to interrogate what it is people want in order to make sure that you maintain that click rate and that open rate. So What are some of the ways that you can engage with members apart from email and EDMs? We'll talk about EDMs a little bit more in my communication, a little bit more in a few minutes, but there are lots of things that you can think about. One of the things that, we've found, we've done a large piece of research recently on awareness days, because we were coming up against, we're a public relations agency, an engagement agency, and we, assist people with things that often combine both lobbying or engagement with stakeholders, government or corporates or whoever that might be, along with public relations. So those things often intersect for us in terms of what the work is that we are doing. What we were finding was that there are a lot of journalists who are telling us that, just because, tomorrow is Teddy Bear Day or next week is, Blue Sky Day, or, the week after is, Green Tree Day, it's not necessarily in and of itself, and very rarely the feedback we were getting is a story. It now needs to coincide more and more with a story that is standalone. And so by that I mean a strong pitch angle, usually some new research, and, something that is telling them something new and some new data, something that is, some evidence that is demonstrating something that the journalist didn't know, and the journalist's audience certainly didn't know before they were thinking about writing it. And even then, it's always a struggle. I mean, we are often pitching to people. We will often have people come to us and say they'd love to get onto the project. And, the project has 60 producers. We've been trying to get Walid Ali to participate in an event in the last month. Walid Ali has 2 separate agents that he has to pitch him private money gigs, and 1 EA, and he has access to 60 producers. It is often very difficult to get through to people and to get these stories up, and so it shows persistence. And so what you're needing to do these days, interestingly, in terms of being able to maximise the exposure and involvement of our members and the broader community and media in terms of awareness days, is come up with the unique angles. Interestingly, 36% of event marketers say that increasing registrations is their biggest challenge. Registrations to events, to, whether that be a webinar, a podcast, a face-to-face event. But, interestingly, 63% plan on investing more in events. And one of the things that I think we are seeing, interestingly as well, is the trend towards, and again, the community or your community's desire to meet face-to-face and engage in some real human interaction. I think we've, it was, 10 or so years ago that the first iPhone came on to the market. And in that time, I think we've had this extraordinary fascination with online connectivity. We've got WhatsApp, we've got Snapchat, we've got every other imaginable platform where we can connect virtually with people. There is a growing body of evidence to indicate that people are coming back to wanting to connect face-to-face in small or medium-sized or whatever it is, appropriate events where they're actually meeting people, seeing face-to-face, being able to reach out and sort of talk to someone in a very much more personal, upfront way. Certainly is the case with a lot of sort of organisations and networking platforms in other countries, both the United States and in Europe. There is a number of specific networking organisations which are growing, not just to network online. There are a number of them that are doing that very well, but they are establishing themselves primarily to bring people together for small, intimate events, which are really well curated and really appeal to people's interests. And that's where I think your organisations can come in when you need to understand what your members want or what your stakeholders want and what sort of events excite them. I'm involved with the Public Relations Institute of Australia. I'm on the New South Wales board, and our bottom line is that we don't organise events if we're going to lose in terms of money. And so I think that makes sense to most people. You don't want to be throwing money out the door, out the window. But I think if you can, as an organisation, put something up in a supporters, supporting organisations boardroom or somewhere where it's going to cost you very little or nothing, then I think there is nothing to be lost in terms of bringing people together or attempting to bring people together to talk about whatever it is that you are doing and whatever it is that might get them involved and engage with you a little bit more. So website and social, again, I've just mentioned the use of online platforms in terms of reaching out, and they are really, really effective ways of reaching people. We still don't really know, though, do we, exactly what people are doing precisely when they read what they see online. We're not there with them. We don't really know. We can guess by ascertaining what actions they may take after they've clicked or visited something. You can remarket to them if they've been to your site and they go somewhere else. You can remarket to them if you're wanting them to support something that you're doing or donate to you. You can, reach out to them if they've taken action and clicked on and signed up to something. But we really don't know exactly what they're doing. So I think, it's about trying to get a grip again on the best type of metrics you can in terms of understanding what people are doing and what people are saying, perhaps your members or other stakeholders about you. And there's a number of ways that you can monitor that. Now, you can monitor that yourself. You can see your online feeds and your online engagement. You can go on and see what people are saying. If you've got a really large organisation, which is really significant, you might think about investing in a couple of platforms, 1 or 2 or 3 platforms, which assist you to monitor these sorts of things. Something like say a Sentia that can monitor lots and lots of online conversations, or Sprout Social, or using other sorts of tools that are similar to that sort of tag and appreciate and will feed back to you exactly the sorts of conversations and tones of conversations that are happening. What is the share of voice that you have in a debate on something online? Who are participating in those discussions? Are they members? Are they stakeholders? Are they opponents? Are they supporters? Trying to understand that and trying to leverage from that, I think, is really important. So, interestingly, 95% of associations use Twitter, 81% of them use LinkedIn, 28% employ a social media manager, and not everyone. Obviously, as you all know, I'm sure there are some of you that are making us sighing as I'm saying that not everyone can afford a social media manager. Often it's just a little bit of, it's part of someone's role. But I think one of the things that we do need to do is make sure that whoever is resourcing social media and social outreach, they are resourced properly. It is it's not something that they're expected to dedicate an hour to a week or an hour to every couple of days and then get it right. I can remember having running a campaign for a large membership organisation a few years ago, and we were brought on. It was a tender. We won the tender, and then we were called in literally starting about 2 weeks before they wanted to get underway. And we set up. They had a Facebook page, but they didn't have a Twitter page at that time. A Twitter handle. So we set one up, and I can remember getting a call from the CEO. He didn't want to spend any money on advertising at the time. And he rang me sort of two days after we set up the Twitter handle and wondered why they only had 7 followers 2 days later. So sometimes people, don't necessarily, appreciate how hard and the long road it takes to get people. And so I suppose it's about trying to understand if you're trying to reach more members or you're trying to reach more supporters or people who are in your tribe, then often a best and expedited way of doing that is to advertise to get some paid growth in terms of your people's awareness of it. And what's really interesting is the next point: only half regularly monitor their social channels, 6% quantify the return on investment. And I've just had a conversation with someone just this morning about return on investment as well. And it's a really interesting question. You can look on Essentia, and I'm sure some of you do use Essentia, but Essentia or Meltwater or some of these platforms who will give you an estimate of, a story on page 4 of the Telegraph that's 4 inches by 2 inches is worth $1,526.62. And if you're running a campaign or if you're doing media and you're wanting to present some of these statistics to your executive or to your board, sometimes that information is helpful. But the point that I made to someone earlier today was, you might get $3 million worth of media acquisition across a year. But quite frankly, you've got to make an assessment whether or not it's the right media, it's speaking to the right people, it's got the right messages in it. Are they positive or negative stories? It's not just about the quantity, it's about the quality and who that media is reaching. Quite often you won't necessarily know the answer to that. You won't know whether your members are reading or watching or observing what it is you're saying. And you won't know whether it's reaching the people that you want to reach. But one way of doing that is, again, to do a survey. So, for example, if you've just done an intense campaign and you've been communicating with members or with stakeholders or whoever that might be, go out to them quickly and say, look, we've recently been doing some work around this, wondered whether or not you'd seen any of the media. 2 or 3 questions will help you perhaps be able to ascertain whether or not your work is actually reaching people and working. Because you can have a dedicated team of media managers doing all sorts of stuff and hoping that they're going to get their message through to the right people. But unless you actually understand the metrics and the measurement, then you really don't know. So one of the things that we do spend a lot of time on, and there's the Public Relations Institute of Australia has a metrics and measurement chart, if you like, or sort of spreadsheet that they use. It's very complicated. We've combined that with some other best practice approaches from some other friends in the industry. And I think it's just really about thinking, what is it that you want to measure? Who wants to know what? What does the board want to know? What does my CEO or my chairman or chairperson want to know? What does my donors, my sponsors, my corporate partners want to know? And I think once you ascertain what it is they want to know, and what is it that qualifies something as a success, then you can measure it. And I think that's the best way of approaching it. But I would urge people to think about measurement, because if you don't, then you really don't know whether or not you're sort of hitting the mark, which is sort of a waste of time, really, to begin with. So, talking about making sure your members are engaged, I think, we've all seen, and I don't know whether or not any of you ascertain, drop-offs and engagement with your external or internal communications. Again, it comes back to measurements. But trying to get them back on track, I think one of the best ways of doing that is making sure you speak to their hearts, their minds, and their attention spans. And there's a couple of ways that I'm going to talk to about how you can do that. Speaking to the hearts and minds, this isn't necessarily always about a passionate, cause celeb. It's not necessarily, not everyone has extraordinarily amazing, jumping out of your skin sort of issues. But members are a member of an organisation for a reason. They're a member of an organisation because you are relevant to them. You are telling them information they need to know, or they should know, or they might want to know. It's something that's going to help their professional practice or whatever it is function better. So that might be their hearts and minds, and their attention spans is how you get to them in the frequency and in the shape and with the tone that you need to make sure that they're on side. So I think one of the things you could do is obviously think about, making sure it's a member first approach. And what does that mean? That could sound like it's a cliche. And I think what it probably means is what I was saying earlier. It's about asking them what they want, because if you don't ask them, you'll never know. And so that's what member first means. I'll just jump in. Someone just asked me a question. How do you deal with negative responses to a survey where people in charge cannot accept the results? Very good question, Annie. Well, we are often, as consultants, in a similar position. It's quite invidious. You can undertake some work, give people advice, but if they don't want to accept it, then you often can't do much about it. What you can do is do the survey a couple of times over a period of months, present that information to them a couple of times in different ways, sort of slice and dice it a couple of different ways and say the research is pretty consistent. It's a bit like looking at, say, the news poll. There's been, I think, 61 news polls where the coalition are behind the polls. And so, as a member of the coalition, you sort of probably take something from that. I don't say for any moment in time that it's a guarantee that there'll be a change of government at the next election, but at the same time, I think it's an indication that things are close. At the same time, when you're doing a survey, I think it's about consistency of that information that you're providing to your senior people. And if you've done it a number of times, obviously you've got to be careful in terms of looking like you're pushing your own agenda. But I think if you're approaching them in a professional way and you're giving them that information, that's as best as really you can do. And ultimately, if they just choose to ignore it or don't want to act upon it, then if there are ramifications as a consequence of that, then that's something that you'll need to talk about with them. But unfortunately, it's probably nothing much that you can really influence. There's no point in having a tantrum, or unfortunately, even though we sometimes want to, it can be very frustrating. So, what does member first approach means? Well, it's about asking them what they want. So, it's a little bit about what we were talking about earlier. So, it's about making sure that you know what they want to hear about. We rely more and more on accurate and reliable data on which to base strategy. So it's about making sure that, unless you have some evidence that says 63% of people actually really want to receive that, recipe on a Friday afternoon that the CEO thinks is really important, or what the staff have been up to over the weekend, or some other series of boring posts about, whatever that might be. You need to know. You need to know what they want, and you need to know whether they tune out when they get certain idioms from you, and that's where you need to ask them what they want. So how do you tailor an approach? Well, I think it's about thinking about, so it's some of the work that we've done just recently with a couple of organisations was, we asked, we went and spoke to a number of focus groups, both online and in person, and said to them, trying to ascertain what they thought about the organisation, how relevant it was to them, trying to really get some feedback on the sort of information they were getting from that organisation. And the thing that they were telling us very, very often was that they were just getting too many EDMs. They were too general, too broad, too vague, and just not targeted to them. And when asked, they were able to really describe very well exactly how those EDMs could be tailored. So I think quite often if you ask your members or you ask your stakeholders or you ask the people that you're communicating to how they want, what they want to know, how often they want to get it from you. I mean, I know if any of you are asked right now, I know what I read every day. There is a certain number of blogs that I like reading. There is a certain number of podcasts that I like hearing about. You know, and it's you know, I know that's going to be part of my weekly reading. The problem comes if you then ask them and then they go, actually, no, we really don't want to hear from you. And that would be a shock and that would be a worry. And so I suppose it's making sure that you're not in that, you don't find yourself in that situation where people are saying they don't want to hear from you. And so it's possibly getting them on the phone, organising some focus groups on the phone, which you can do with something like GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, and talking to them about what's relevant. I mean, most people who are a member of an organisation pay some hundreds of dollars because it's either a professional organisation or it's an organisation that they have to be involved, they have to be a member of, or it's really pretty much it's imperative that they're involved in the loop. So you probably, as member organisations, won't find too many people to say that they just don't want to hear from you at all. But I think it's about getting that mix right, that really critical mix right. Otherwise, you know, you're liable to get it wrong and you don't want that. So if you think about it, you know, 3/4 of associations find it a challenge to deliver personalised content to members. That shouldn't be the case. It's not that hard. I mean, we're using a range as a small agency communicating to a bunch of people. We're using a range of different things. We're using EDMs. We're using targeted emails that are used from delivered via sort of free, virtually free platforms. We're using a platform called YAM, YAMM, which enables you to personalize an email and personalize the email through the body of the text. And it looks very much like you've sent them a direct email rather than, you put them on a mailing list. There are other platforms that you can use to do a similar thing, and I think it's about coming up with the thing that works for you, or the combination of things that work for you that will mean that they click, they engage, they do things as a result, they respond to your survey, they respond to your question, they do whatever it is that you're asking them to do, which I think is important. Personalising that information shouldn't be hard. We have the technology, and it's about making sure you allocate that time, and it wouldn't be very much extra time to make sure that works. And it's absolutely imperative to the longevity of your organisation and the sustainability of it to make sure you're a member. It's I suppose incumbent, I think, almost on you to make sure that communication is tailored. I think a much greater level of personalisation is required to drive deeper member engagement. I know what I like hearing. I don't like getting, a lot of stuff from dozens and dozens of people. So if I get, one email a week from someone that I really want to hear from, I'll look at it. If I get 4, may not. So it's about making sure that you are not overdoing it, I think is really critical. Prioritising is really important as well, and I think it's about working out what is good for you in terms of member communications. I mean, we're working with a couple of national sporting organisations which rely pretty largely on Facebook. It's free. They know the members are on there. The members use it for all sorts of things. They put up draws, scores, information about the sport, all sorts of stuff. Facebook works for some people. Sometimes Facebook, sometimes people are on a number of platforms. They go and grab them all, or when push comes to shove, they go and, set them all up. Then they think that the questions that I've had at webinars like this or at presentations is, do I need to be on Snapchat? Do I need to be on, X, Y, or Z? Do we have to be on Instagram? I think the answer to that question in terms of communicating with your members or your stakeholders is this. You need to be where you think the people are that you need to talk to are. Now, I know from myself as a company, I'm in a number of places. I have a very broad audience. Not so, though, all of you. And some of you have very specific audiences. You know that you've got audiences of people who are pretty much exclusively on Facebook or pretty much exclusively on Twitter, or they might just reside on Instagram if they're younger people, or they might even be on Snapchat. There are increasing numbers of corporates who are engaging on Snapchat and paying to be there. It's still pretty costly, but the cost will come down over time, just like Twitter and Facebook did when we first started advertising there. The costs come down quite significantly over a short period of time. So I think it's about thinking, don't get scared, don't get freaked out, don't get worried that you're not doing the right thing, that you're not on enough platforms. I think the question is, you need to be able to resource it. If you can't resource what you're doing, then there's no point. And if you can't, make sure that you are putting relevant content which talks to that audience sitting there at that time, then I wouldn't bother. I mean, our messages on Instagram sound probably quite different to what they do on Twitter and Facebook. We use our website. We use EDMs. We probably will put out consistent information, but it might be slightly different on each platform. And so it's about thinking to yourself, how do I speak on those platforms, rather than worrying yourself that you're not on enough platforms. It's about making sure the ones you're on, you're doing well. You have information about the ones that you are on, and that they're making sure that the tribe that you need to speak to are there. And I think that's the key thing. So key takeaways, if people want to jump in with a question, we're almost done. I think the key takeaways are this. You need to create the right targeted content across all the platforms you're on. You don't have to create lots of content that is meaningless to people on every imaginable platform. I think that's the key. You need to review and act on your member engagement on and offline. That's about understanding what that member engagement is. If you don't understand it, you can't react to it. If you don't have any metrics and measurement on it, you can't review it. So you need to have that information so to enable you to be equipped to be able to respond. You need to have a clear strategy with goals and KPIs for everything that you're doing, and that's going back to the point that I made about, as an organisation, either at the beginning of a strategy or at the beginning of a campaign, sit down and talk very thoroughly about what it is that you want to know, what it is you want to achieve, and then work out from there what it is you need to monitor coming out of those activities that you will decide through that process. Monitor your return on investment. That's not just about money. It's not just about saying, we've acquired, $623,000 worth of media coverage for a spend of $10,000. It's not just that. Yeah, that looks great when you put it to the board, but actually what was in that coverage? What was in the social media engagement? What was in the Twitter conversations? What was in the Facebook conversations? What was the tone of voice? What was it? Was it supportive? Was it antagonistic? It's about understanding what the return on the investment is. That's not just money. It's about time. It's about effort. It's about events. It's about human, endeavors, really, is the ROI. It's not just a money thing. And ongoing measurement and finding out what your members want is absolutely key. And that goes back to really asking them. at the end of the day. And if you don't ask them and don't talk to them, that can be done in a range of ways, from deciding that you're just going to talk to 20 members and picking them randomly, or picking 20 members that are going to be relevant for you across the organisation, or organising a group of focus groups online, or face-to-face events where you sit down and ask them what they want, or a survey. There's lots of different ways that you can engage stakeholders and members to make sure that you have that information. There's really no excuse. If you're communicating with them, I think it's about making sure that you know that it's what they want to hear. Now, someone's also asking a question. People are getting survey fatigue. It's a good point. It's a good point, Helen. How do you get around this to find out what they want? Well, again, it's about perhaps trying different ways of talking to them. It might be a focus group, asking them to talk. We had a great deal of success. Quite often people are really chuffed to be invited to put forward their opinion about a particular issue, or about the organisation they're a member of. They're often really thrilled to be asked to do that. They're not just one person filling out a survey, or calling people, giving 3 people in your organisation a list of 20 people each, and then calling them. And more time consuming, you'll get a better result, and you will be pretty secure in the findings that you make about what it is you're getting, and what it is they're hearing from you, what they want. Of course, it would be great if you could talk to every member. You're never going to be able to do that. Very, very few organisations can ever do that. So it's about going to get an accurate representation, an accurate sort of average, if you like, or a sense of what people are thinking, rather than making sure that you're sort of getting a really broad sense, but not particularly much detail. I think it's about making sure that you've got more information than less. So thanks for that question, Helen. So that is all we've got today. If you've got a question, please jump in and let me know. We'll be doing the next webinar will be in a month's time. I don't have a date from you. It'll probably be the first Tuesday in June. And it'll be about government engagement on the run-up to the next election, on the basis that we're probably in an election year, and it's either going to be at some stage in the next couple of months, or sometime between now and next March. So it's about getting your head around that and thinking about what you need to do to get your ducks in a row. So thanks everyone for joining. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that's been valuable. These slides will be sent out to you, and they'll also be up on our website on the 50 Acres YouTube channel. If you search 50 Acres TV, they will be there, but we will send you a link in the email that we'll send to you in the next day or so, with the slides and a link to that the webinar, so you can listen to it again if you've got nothing else better to do. So I'd urge you all to go and have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and have a lovely afternoon. I know it's starting to get chilly down here in Canberra, which is nice. I like the cold weather. So I hope wherever you are, you have a lovely afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. I'm really grateful that you could join us. Thanks again.